Cool, Craig. While we continue this, then we'll just
Sure.
go into it.
Rugby is probably the pinnacle of where I first realized, I would often say on stage of rugby that, like, rugby, I can understand like playing once, but I
Mm.
can't understand like playing again the next week. It's just like to survive. And when you think like I halfway know rugby schedules, they often like, train on kind of Monday, Tuesday, maybe have a Thursday off, and then like game day Friday, Saturday, sometimes two on the weekend or whatever. And I just think like it's not so much that they can do it, it's that they can do it like a couple of times in a row that blows my mind.
I'm gonna piss everyone off when I say this. American football is the harder sport. American football's
Yeah,
harder
wow.
than rugby. I played both of them,
Yeah.
and rugby is a complete endurance
Yeah.
because it's no stopping and starting. It's consistently going. But American football, off-ball tackles, man, off-ball tackles. Like I was O-line. If I got past that D-line and I was hitting someone in the back, I
Yeah.
was taking them out. I
Well,
was hurting them.
I've not often spoken to people that have the perspective of both, so I respect that. But I also know like my experience with hockey in my own life, in
Oh,
terms of
that's a
like,
devil sport, that one. Ice hockey
yeah,
just
as a
seems,
contact sport. It's
yeah.
curious though as well. There was and it's where we're at now with professional sport, that there was like a period of time where after games players began to continue like working out. I don't know if you know that transition, and I don't know if that took place in either American football or rugby.
I went
But there's
McDonald's after every game.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, most exactly. Yeah, most people take it,
Yeah.
take a personal
McFlurry
break,
and
right?
20 chicken
Yeah.
nuggets. That was my after game
But
plan.
but to think like endurance wise that it's now not uncommon for like a professional hockey athlete to finish a 3 hour game and then in their own stadium go to the gym and
Yeah.
do like an hour on the bike,
No,
like,
it's ridiculous that is. But
and
I
also,
had to stop. I had to stop because I remember doing. I used to play for Sussex Funders, professional level team,
yeah.
and I had work sort of the next day. But when I got home, I went and took a shower. I thought I was in there for 10 minutes, and I was in there for 3 hours because my head was just.
Wow.
It wasn't there.
Yeah.
And what I thought was a second was just me against like the shower like that, just and 3 hours just went. And it's like right,
Wild.
you
Yeah.
know, that's why you can see they all go like they're not right in the brain after like playing top tier
Yeah.
level so long. So
Famously now.
I
Yeah,
walked
it's a,
out with my consciousness still.
oh yes, a famous study that absolutely, yeah, like brain injury and bruising for sure. And it's also it's reflected as well in the longevity now of professional athletes, that they just like they're being hit by bigger, stronger athletes, and for that reason they have to retire quicker and are put into retirement quicker. It's
It's weird. I never found the Also, I'll introduce everyone, guys, in a second. Sorry.
right.
Um, I
Hi.
never, I never found the bigger guys the problem, and it was the same
Yeah.
in rugby. It's the smaller, stocky guys because they're closer to the ground.
Yeah.
Big guys, 6'4", 6'5", they fall like a tree.
Yeah, sure.
But
Yeah,
it's the
yeah, yeah.
small guys who are by the ground who you are not putting on their ass.
Yeah, I can imagine that like the Bruce Lee faster, smaller bullet moving faster is
Yeah.
always the you know greater threat for sure. I concur with that.
I'll do my introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sit Down for Stand Up. Man needs no introductions. Would I say my favourite Canadian? I mean, Brian Adams is
Uh
up there. Brian Adams is
uh
up there, so I'll say you're on par with
with
Brian
with
Adams.
Brian Adams, and who did you say?
You and Brian Adams.
Ah,
Celine Dion. It's not gonna be Bublé. It's not gonna be Celine Dion, is it?
ah,
You know. So
ah,
it's got to be you, Craig. How's it going,
that's
man? You
nice of you
good?
to say. That's wonderful. I'll the next time I'm walking past his mansion in Chelsea, I'll think of you.
Good, good. Please, please. How's it going,
Uh,
Craig? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I count my blessings and I'm grateful. And yeah, great to hear your voice. Nice to see your face. And thanks for asking me to do this.
No problem. I mean, I've always thought the Canadian accent just oozes. Like it's, I don't know. It's like an orchestra. I've always found the Canadian accent. It just flows so passionately.
Well, it may be often there's a major injection of Scots in the Canadian accent that's mainly either Scots or Irish are
I
the
thought it'd be
sort of
French.
the main undertones. Yeah, the French is a funny one because it's a separate diaspora that very rarely bleeds into the other two like main sort of language, types, as it were. It's there for sure, and I love hearing it. I find it a very curious accent, and particularly its relationship with France and how they refer to it often as like lumberjack. I don't know if you're aware, but the French Canadian accent is famously from a particular region of Normandy that
Right,
was
okay.
the larger portion of its emigre before it proliferated mainly in Canada. There's all sorts of aspects of that Canadian sort of the birth of Canada. For example, like the entire workforce of the Hudson Bay Company, which is like one of the earliest. It's, I think, the oldest company on Earth. The British,
Beavers.
you, you
Is it the
know,
beavers?
the which
The beavers. The what beaver hats?
the beaver hats, essentially. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the voyageurs, essentially like the guys paddling to go get the beavers, exactly. But they're like almost all from Orkney Island. So
Okay.
like so when you hear Canadian accents, it's not just that it's often injected with a diaspora, but it's very often a specific diaspora. And I always like lament because like the Yanks and particularly South Park, which to our credit, making fun of the Canadian accent, the Ute and the Boot. I'm
In a
always like,
boot, yeah.
but the Ute and the Boot is the Scottish accent in the Canadian accent. You're like you're making fun of the Scots, but you're only hearing ours. So yeah, but I appreciate the compliment anyway, whatever it is.
Well, I remember in at uni, my economics teacher, he was, and this is a bucket list right here. He was a French Canadian black African gay lecturer, and his accent was just it was beautiful,
Yeah, I
and I hang on
wish
every word.
I wish I could say that surprises me, Daniel. Just because one of the most curious things about my experience with the French Canadian accent is mainly via Montreal, which is its sort of most international diaspora. Quite heavily broken up between the Irish. If there's any like English in Montreal, it very often has an Irish background to it. So that's not really that uncommon. You've got like English Canada, mainly based out of Toronto, squared off with French Canadian culture, but via Montreal, where actually like it's a very international, but French international in terms
Right.
of Vietnamese and Haitian and very heavily represented French diaspora, but ethnic or ethnique as they call them. And then of course, who is their bedfellow counter to the English? The Irish. And then of course you've got that the affinity for each other is drawn closer together mainly by Catholicism, which again in many ways buttresses English Canada. These are all sort of the organs grinding in the background that you might not realize. But
100% no.
but my experience with French Canadian culture is mainly through Montreal, only because they're like even to the degree that they're the only ones that can really speak to me in English. Whereas like there's much more French parts of Canada, like particularly Quebec City, Quebec, and
Yeah, and
but
then only speak.
I wouldn't be able to like order a cab there. So my experience with it's much more limited.
Well, I've always found it curious because we will get into comedy in a second, guys. Sorry.
Aha,
When I used to do recruitment, I used to run a recruitment company doing
yeah,
blockchain, gambling, AI, and like gambling, gaming, blockchain, AI, and it was international. We had it in Gibraltar, and every single country they all had their CVs in their native language and in English,
interesting.
besides the French. The French
Only French.
refused to translate their CVs into English.
Yeah, Yeah,
And
perfect. Yeah,
is,
I quite appreciate. There's a deep admiration that often Canadians have for the French, just because they're so stubborn. You know, in terms of I don't know the ins and outs of it, but there's always been quite famous disconnects where the air traffic controllers won't speak in English, at huge risk and detriment to everybody.
but I
I
think it's
quite
same
love
with the
them for that.
Welsh. I think it's same with the Welsh a little bit. Some parts in Wales, they've still got the sign languages in Wales.
Yeah,
Whereas I couldn't name, I don't know one Welsh person who doesn't also speak English. But it's
yeah,
like, no,
sure.
we are going to
And
pay the extra money to have them up there out
yeah,
of principle.
until you go to North Wales and run into that, in the Erie pub where the music stops as you walk in,
I remember I once did horse riding in Wales,
Yeah.
and there was a pub, and it had the honour system.
Oh yeah.
So there's no one working there. You
Mm.
just go in, you drink what you want, and you put money in the bucket. And I just thought, God, could you imagine that working in London?
Yeah.
Like,
I
you
wish.
would, it,
I can
it wouldn't
only
exist.
imagine that you have some relationship with the Welsh via rugby as well, I was thinking. And I, for whatever reason, had in my head, well, because I experienced it a lot there, but I do really like the honor system. And I remember it also vibrant in New Zealand in the times that I've been there quite regularly, which also has that. Well, actually, there is a combination there. There is a relationship there in terms of, rugby and the sort of, for all of its ills and for all of the reasons people tend not to like it, it also, in my experience across the board by sport, is in many ways the most honorable.
Oh, 100. Well, they say, isn't it? Football is a gentleman's sport played by hooligans. Rugby is a hooligan sport played by gentlemen.
This is what I mean.
You
Yeah,
know, brother.
it's pretty wild. And I first noticed that in again in my experiences in New Zealand, and I just saw a marked contrast in I don't know what sayings apply to hockey, but it's just it's kind of it I dare say it's a bit of a cheater sport. It's a bit like, if you can get away with it, you do. And I found, when I kind of left Canada as a late teenager, I realized that, sort of something that I venerated as a child, I thought was quite dishonorable. And it was particularly when I saw New Zealand rugby, and particularly how the referee was revered and treated.
Oh, 100%, 100.
Yeah.
And what we had a saying in rugby, anything's legal as long as the ref doesn't see it.
Okay. There you go. And the
So,
ref is God.
yeah, in the
Yeah.
scrum, like you would do like little uppercuts from time to time, but your
Yeah.
hand slipped.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can't talk to the ref. You swear, God, you're off.
Totally. And
They are gods.
I
Yeah.
still remember. I still remember on a. It was like like an international between South Africa and I think it was Oz, but it was in Eden Park in Auckland, and there was there was some a bit of rough housing behind the play, and they stopped. I'd never seen anything like this. They stopped it, and like it's on the Trinitron. It's massive, and you're watching it take place in real time. And I still remember being struck because the linesman went over and spoke to the referee, and he's like, those guys over there, and then I still remember the ref was just like, number 7, come here, number 4, come here, and then bawled them out, like had a little talk with them like they were little schoolboys in front of everybody. I'd never seen anything like it. It was just, and they truly, whether or not it's pageantry or for whatever reason, it still struck me that the players seemed like they were admonished. They seemed reprimanded.
It's like, even like footballers all do it all the time. They'll spit whilst talking to the ref.
Totally.
You do not do that. But then I think there are some culture things that still have the etiquette. Like, I remember, like, I'm a rocker. Yeah, I've done the Slipknot gigs, the Rammstein gigs, but it's the mosh pit. Like, mosh pits are feral. But if someone hits the floor, everyone backs up. Lift them up. Are you okay? Are you all right? Good.
Yeah.
One side. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
honor among thugs.
Exactly. It's brilliant. So
yeah, I love stuff like that. I do.
Same
I,
we,
I do
we will go
appreciate
to the
that.
comedy
Culturally.
part now.
Yeah.
Craig, the reason for the episode is because it's for new people to sort of like learn about comedy from people from the greats.
Old people.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, so I want to ask a couple of questions here about comedy. Like, I'll start off with, how and why did you get into it?
Well, I was kind of already doing it, but I didn't realize that what I was doing was also like an aspect of the industry that was allowable, which was essentially storytelling. So I was, in a sporting environment, unsurprisingly, like we're discussing, but it was whitewater kayaking that I was training at that time with the Canadian national team. I was a young paddler, and we were training in a little tiny cabin with four guys in it in a part of Canada, one of the rare places where it doesn't freeze over in the winter, or not so much that you can't winter train on moving water. And I just by nature, by my natural, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's Celtic, whatever it is, but I just would always tell the stories of my day to my buddies, like you would, but in an entertaining way as best I could. And there was a visiting paddler, a guy still I remember, named Peter Kochi, who he was a dietitian who quite famously starved the actors during the filming of the film Alive. If you back to rugby, if you recall that film, it was filmed in a place called Panorama in the Canadian mountains in British Columbia. And so he was a pretty cool dude. He was a great paddler. And he just happened to be like, he'd come up from Vancouver on weekends when he wasn't working on films, and was hanging out with us. And I'd just, sort of come into the place at that point where I lived and tell my stories to my buddies. And he was just like, "Oh, you should do that on stage." And I was like, "Well, what?" And he's like, "Oh, what you're doing there?" And I was just like, well, like just telling stories and stuff. And he's like, "Yeah." And at that point, like, I had seen, Robin Williams, for example, by that time, Daniel, but I had no idea that, like, to me, and I can see why even at that time, I just thought, he was sort of, maybe there's a nepotism involved, that it wasn't accessible to me, for example, that I thought that everything that he was doing, if I'm remembering, like, I think it was The Met was one of the first, like, DVDs I'd ever seen, or at the time, like, VHS tapes. And he was working through an audience member's purse. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, he's brilliant, like he's a genius, quite obviously. And then, sort of through a tiny bit of investigation after the conversation with Peter in the cabin, I realized, like, oh, he practices. Oh, there's a purse in every audience. Oh, the same stuff is in a purse in every audience. Oh, you can do purse jokes. And then I just realized, oh, wow, like, yeah, if you can, like, work on your stuff. And so I went back to college the next like semester after that winter. So I guess it would have been September of like 88, 89. And there was a little competition, a stand-up competition, and I entered it, and I came second place to a couple of guys who did impressions of female hurdlers as viewed from underneath with their belly buttons, and and so, they're like really vulgar. And I was like, telling stories about crossing the border with my family when I was a kid, eating too many oranges and being afraid to admit to the Americans that they were that they were from Florida, and we, could have went to jail, and just, most basic sort of storytelling, quite innocent, really, when
So
I think about it.
you got universal comedy. Your
Yeah.
set works everywhere.
Yeah, totally, and but very centric from my own experience. So
Yes.
I also was like a bit thrown that they were just sort of like being vulgar without any personal touch to it. They could have been anybody. You could have cut their heads off, and the humor would have stood. So I sort of felt at the time that it was more of an interesting challenge for me, certainly, to always try to have my humor come from the perspective of my, what I consider my uniqueness. So that was I came second place. I won a comedy album. I was almost immediately vetted to try to get on stage. I can only tell you, like, I don't feel sorry for anybody who's, I do feel sorry, I'm afraid, for anybody who's starting now, just because like literally in 88, they were like on me I realized quite quickly that all I needed was more time, and that was going to equate to like more income. Because a 5 minute spot got less than a 10-minute spot. A 10-minute spot meant that they were pursuing me for MC work. I realized almost right away, North America is quite a bit different in that the next spot that you're trying to attain is a middle spot. That requires like 30 minutes, but then you're into like really, decent dough. And then after that, they do what's called a co-headliner or a split headliner. So you need like 40 minutes to be part of like a double headline bill. And then after that, if you got like a couple of hours under your belt, or at least an hour that you're like really competent with, because obviously it's not all going to be applicable on every night,
No.
then you were into like professional dough. And I was like almost immediately at the time I was whitewater rafting as my like day job, and so like these were gravy times for me, Daniel. It was incredible. I had a motorbike. I would run.
Living the dream.
Hey,
Just living the dream.
totally like unreal, like running tourists down, like if you know Banff National Park in the town of Banff, I'd be running tourists down either the Bow River or the Red Deer River. That would take like 3-4 hours. I'd feed them, set up, chop some wood, and then get on a motorbike, drive an hour and a half to Calgary. Sometimes like do 5 shows over a weekend. So like I'd be able to run tourists down, have like a Thursday show, come back, run tourists again. All the other like raft guides would have to stay over and do all the chores and move all the boats and stuff. And I was just like basically like I was like a ringer who would just come in, do the rafting itself, do the fun bit, and then go up and do stand-up shows. And it was like I was making double bubble all weekends, and it was fantastic. It was just like these were really gravy times working with Americans who very often, like, this was actually something that might be curious to you, that like even early days I was sort of quite fearful almost of even dreaming of going through the bother of trying to get a green card to work in the States, because the people who I was working with, the like stars who had come up and worked the clubs that I was working at that time, were like some of them had like 30 Lettermans, like 25 Tonight shows, like just off the charts credits, like just gargantuan numbers of credits. And they were like doing middle spots in American clubs. Like, because you have to, you forget that like America, prior to his death, you had like guys like Williams were just like around, now like, Seinfeld's a stand-up, right? Like you're just not going to like get yourself.
You imagine. You could, because I've heard stories like, when they're doing it and Chappelle will just walk into the club and just go up and do like a 15.
Funny you say that. I've not. I've worked with Chappelle in Montreal. I've smoked weed with Chappelle.
Cool.
Actually, I had a funny period in my silly career where for like years, she stopped now, thankfully, probably more Alzheimer's than any intervention of her own. But my mom would very regularly ask, like, "How is Dave doing?" And I'd always be, "Who the Chappelle?" And she, "Yeah, how's Dave?" It's like, "Mom, he's like a gargantua star. He's like one of the biggest he's like a prophet in comedy. Like, he's not my friend, Mom, just because I burned a hoolie with him in Montreal in '94. It doesn't mean that he like keeps it
that's
but I find it sincere that she did. But my favorite intervention or experience like that was in the comic strip in New York. And I loved this, like how it was done. Actually, I was waiting to go on at like sort of 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, which is kind of normal if you're an out of towner, that you'd be on that late. And just suddenly, like, the show manager came up with his little like brown envelopes and just started like a Mexican wave, just paying people off, because Chris Rock had walked in. And like just literally, like, same as you say Chappelle would, just like walked onto stage. There's a chalkboard showing the half dozen acts that are coming up, and they're just like, not coming on tonight, right? Like, just watching a guy like Chris Rock lean on the mic and do, essentially, here's your money. and you can stay and watch if you want, but you're like not getting near a microphone tonight. And that, as a kind of an American, sort of appeal to fame, that is one of the like kind of wildest things that you see in America that doesn't really translate anywhere else, including particularly in the UK, that there's just not like a veneration for like superstardom in a way. Like that's all it is in the States. And actually it's quite curious as well that even like audience members, if you ever go in an American club, there's that energy that even if you're doing like an open mic, like literally if you're doing like a 5-minute spot on like a normal night at any club, I say like across, I've to a degree done shows all across the States. And if they know that you're on that stage, like people are like, hey, where are you from? What are you like really, really curious about you? Because Americans, more than any other place in the world, if you can make it there, you'll make it. They have that element of their culture that they just know that like you're where like Roseanne Barr started. You're where
I'll tell you
Seinfeld
one thing.
started.
One thing I like about
They see that
comedy.
connection to fame of
Mm,
stand-ups.
one thing I like about comedy. One thing I sort of notice is that comedian to comedian, there's not much ego. It's sort of left at the door. Like comedians who are really killing it at the moment,
Yeah,
they've got time for
yeah,
people who are just starting out.
yeah.
There is no ego. It's sort of left at the door almost. So there's almost like
Where
a
are you finding that? Sort of across the board?
across the board. The fact,
Yeah.
no, the perfect example right now, Craig, that you'd
Hmm.
speak to me. Do you know what I mean?
Ah, that's
Harry,
nice to see this.
people would talk to
Yeah.
people.
Oh, that's
They, you,
nice to say.
you
But
couldn't imagine that in many other industries.
I guess, yeah, I just don't consider myself famous. So I suppose that's also a big part of it. But yeah, I appreciate that
But
that
then
they're
it's relevance.
yeah.
Like I am nobody in comparison to you. But if we looked at have like you at like a Seinfeld, a CK, a Chris Rock, it's relevance. But you know what I mean? Like people would look at you and be like, "Holy shit!" Like I bragged that I'm talking to you.
Oh, that's nice of you to say, but I do see the sort of analogy you're trying to make there. I understand that for sure. I guess, yeah, yeah. Yeah, similarly, in honesty, I've not ever really run into too much in the way of ego along the way in terms of like, I've been lucky enough to be introduced. Actually, probably one of the most incredible um, what would you call it? Disparities of potential ego clash was, and obviously we tell these stories because my ego works to try and, put people in a mind space of my own, sort of successes. But like the most acute potential that I had to be starstruck in the presence of Jim Carrey, and doing an open spot for him in 1991, probably at that point the largest gig of my life. Three and a half thousand people at the Orpheum Theater in Vancouver, New Year's Eve. And I was just, you can imagine, Daniel, I was just shaking at the
Yeah.
thought of like being in the building with it. He wasn't as superstardom as he is now, but he'd finished Pet Detective and was going into The Mask. So he was like, he'd already written himself the $1 million check famously. So he was like a household name, but not even in the way that he is now. But he just like was so immediately disarming. It's like he knew, like he burst into the little dressing room that I had, and it was like he obviously knew how nervous I was going to be, either meeting him or doing the gig or whatever. But it was just like an old friend popping in and saying, "Hey, how you going?" And yeah, I suppose in that way I was, just bowled over by how somebody could be so selfless when they could have just, utterly pissed towards me, which I've had other funny ones where my nerves came up, where I was doing a show, not as long ago, a few years back, and I was interviewing Coolio before he passed away, and that, like, it was in a club in LA, so it was also like it had that kind of mystique about it. And I told him, I just, I'm a bit nervous, man, when I first met him. And he said, why? Because I'm going to shoot you with my AK. Just like, ah. In the same way they all, seem at that fame level to have the ability to disarm you when they can feel your nervousness.
Yeah, well, they're sort of walking into the building like half hour before they actually do, and
How's that?
they sort of, you know their presence sort of like half an hour before they're
Yeah,
actually there, like that
yeah,
aura they've
yeah.
sort of
The
created.
stars, yeah, absolutely. That star aura, as you say, is wild. Yeah.
So how would you say, doing comedy in, America, the big clubs, is in relation to is doing it over here in the UK?
Well, the big one is for sure that just as we've been, dancing around discussing, it's the profile thing. Actually, funnily enough, in mentioning that, also one of the strangest things I've been on the fringes of is that I was on the weekend or the last weekend that, I remember he was there. He might have been there successive to this, but Chris Rock came and did spots at the Comedy Store when I was doing a weekend there. This, I don't know, back, 15 years, let's say.
That was my
And
first gig, Comedy Store,
nice. London or Manchester?
London,
All
King
right,
Kong.
nice. Yeah, and so he I was just recently like last weekend in fact talking with the bouncer who was there at the store when this happened. He walked the audience. I don't remember if it was either the Friday or the Saturday, but I think he pumped it on the Friday and then like walked them like. And this is at a time when Saturday night, I don't think anybody, he was like a surprised guest. He was in town doing a film or whatever. So I don't think anybody knew he was going to be there and they weren't there for him. But he just like read British sensibilities wrong and started to go into his like, black women be doing this and
Mm,
white women be doing that. And like it's just suddenly like the whole crowd just took a while. Like they didn't, immediately. There was no like moment that they turned, but
mm.
over a very short succession of bits and presumption of what like white people do and what black people do, there just an energy started to grow in the room, and then just watching like that many people walk out on a guy who at that time like he wasn't even the superstar that he is now,
Mm.
but like watching a really really capable and high profile yank act who pumped it on the Friday just like walked the entire room bar the staff like 24 hours later and somewhat incredulous to himself. Was that that, so that's kind of a curiosity of like both British psyche and the British sort of mind, the paradigm that's here, but then also that filters down quite precipitously into how British people treat celebrity against quite famously how Americans do. Conversely,
I
there's
also
like
think with UK comedy, like one thing I've noticed, I watch comedy all day, every day. It's my life is doing the podcast and everything. So
wow,
one thing I've sort of noticed is UK comedians do more self-deprecation. And I know there's no general rule of thumb. American comedians, they'll talk more about party lifestyle, like getting fucked up, drinking. Oh, I was smoking weed the other day. Well, I don't think UK comedians talk about like intoxication and drugs as much. More, my life's crumbling. Laugh at
interesting.
me, not laugh with me.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the sociological study that is comedy in terms of, and particularly like culturally, how it's received, and exactly what you're analyzing there. And I find like British audiences definitely, and I think there's been an evolution of them certainly, in the 30 years whatever that I've been here, I've as well noticed a difference. But what I've always most appreciated about it is it's um, they're just cagier. They're less likely to bandwagon without like a sincere cracking of their scrutiny.
Oh, that's
whereas like
interesting.
Americans tend to be less cynical right out of the gate, and even as audiences. So, and again, it also and maybe this has changed because my experience with America is certainly latent and several decades ago now, but there seems to be much more of a veneration for the production, in terms of like, if you're on the show, you're already like, that's enough for the crowd. You've been vetted by the production.
Okay.
They think you're talented now, and that's all you really have to do is hit the ball when it comes across the plate. Whereas like I find Brits are much more cynical across the board to the entire production. They're
Hmm.
like that's a lot of my early patter often on like tour shows, where their cynicism is such that they just don't expect it to be good. Whether it's
Off the bat, I'll tell you what I think that is, and something I have noticed recently,
yeah,
and I don't know the terminology for it, so I'm just going to make it up as right now. Um, the audience don't give into peer pressure laughter.
there
Just
you
because
go.
the person's next to me is laughing, if I don't find it funny, I'm not going to join in on the laughter. You almost
Absolutely.
got to win them all individually over.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But that also psychologically, you might appreciate, to me, that plays into also why I'm really, really particular, particularly when I'm setting up my own rooms, which I prefer to do, which is why I prefer to tour rather than do spots on like existing shows, for the audience being clandestine, for
Hmm.
the audience being like anonymous in the dark, so that that is their prerogative, so that they don't
Okay, yeah.
feel that they are part of the whole or the group, and they don't feel pressured by that energy that you're talking about. That's really important to me, and I really like, I have a personal aversion to seeing overly lit audiences. The number of times that I look on social media, I'll very often find like shows where the talent is less lit than the audience. It's like really common,
Yeah.
aside from like terrible sound. It's also just really, really not invariably, that's wrong, but like not uncommon in slightest to see a really poorly lit stage and a really well lit audience. And I just like, it gives me the cringes, because I'm just like, no, I want my audience to be able to like to have that
Crowd work, don't you?
anonymity.
You love crowd work. You
I
love
do.
engaging with the audience.
I do. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that we're talking about, like psychologically, and I love like cultural disparity as well. I like to find concurrence with my own impression, particularly with like the British experience. There's nothing better for me than finding somebody else who's from somewhere else in the audience, and then to be able to reflect off of them. Do you see what they're doing? Do you see what
And
they're doing?
do you find that hard in the UK? Because, like I said, I'm from Southeast London. You go
Yeah,
over the river and
yeah,
it's a different dialect altogether.
yeah,
It's almost a different audience altogether.
yeah,
One joke that might land in London might kill it, might bomb it in Essex.
yeah,
You
yeah.
find it very, some it's
That
not
I
that
love.
transferable.
That's what I love.
It's what you like. Okay.
That's my favorite aspect of the British conundrum, especially as it applies to a foreign comedian, where they can like, and I've seen it through 100 different eyeballs over decades now, of just watching somebody like rock the hell out of like a South London gig like you're talking about, and then like literally 40 minutes later just utterly pile it into the tarmac at some place just up the road, and being somewhat like, unless you're really invested in it like we have been for as long as we have, just being incredulous as to why they bombed. It's like, I did the same set. I did it the same way. It's like,
The
well,
word.
that's why it didn't work.
Oh, you done it like you do. I've done gig one night. I did the same gig the exact next week.
Yeah,
And yeah, bombed on my ass. I will ask you then, Craig. I
yeah,
love this question.
yeah.
What time did you bomb the hardest?
Ooh, ooh, I've had some monsters. When I think back to like,
Therapy
oh,
time now.
yeah, yeah, I'm trying to think of like the worst ones. Oh, I've had the worst is when like the house turns the lights off on you. Actually, probably late and live. Actually, Edinburgh is one of the, like, sort of most monumental. It's the one that I've heard the most about, like reflected back over the years. People like I was there. Like no way. It's like a happening. It's so instrumental or monumental, really. But that's also like, you can tell that I take some degree of pride in that as well, just because, like, I don't like give up easily, and I certainly don't surrender. And there's a huge amount of independence that's necessary, and comes through the actual, just the whole exposition of stand up. Invariably, you do it alone. You do it alone, and you do it in a lot of really risky places, strangers that are drunk invariably, places that you don't know, the fire exits of, let alone, like, the street. For years, Daniel, to give you like some insight, and it still holds true, I like still do this, like, religiously. I don't, even at my own tour gigs, you would be hard pressed unless you like hired somebody, I would say almost professionally, or were really, really dedicated. You would never, ever find out where I've parked or where I'm staying.
Okay.
Like, and that's out of, like, I do not approach the gig from being dropped off in front of the venue ever.
Right. Always round the
And
back.
yeah, and that, that's just like personal safety. I always perform with the idea that I might have to get out of here like there's a fire. And I've had to over, like, over years.
The one I can't remember who did I have the bet with. I was talking about you.
Yeah.
I think it was with Adam Bloom, who I was
Oh
talking
yeah, yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah.
and I said, I think I bet him a tenner that you wouldn't be able to sit down for the whole hour. You'd have to get up and move because you're so energetic on stage.
Oh,
Like
I
you
see. I
use
see.
every single bit of the
Yeah,
stage. You're pretty much running around
yeah,
for the full 20, like when all the
yeah.
times you're always on the move.
I
How would you deal with a small stage?
I don't like them. But I feel, but each environment I also like to, take as a challenge for
Yeah.
sure. And so, there I would, really with aplomb dive into almost any performance situation. But I, as you say, would prefer a larger stage. But then that, like, has taught me over the years that my need for that, or my want for that, tells me to work the other way, in the same way. But at the same time, I just years and years and years ago started to realize that I much preferred to be able to perform that which I was projecting, verbally. And from that point, really liked to get into the characterization of what I do. And if there's anything, I probably have only evolved to take more time, to find more strength between the notes, and be less desperate to be, hyper frenetic as you're describing. It's interesting, actually. I now, like, almost invariably, because I'll start to feel the energy off of people. I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like, converse to like how you're describing how I perform, audiences are even less energetic now, in my experience. Like, it seems people have less energy, like, collectively, or maybe less desire to express it as a collective. But regardless, whatever's going on, and maybe it's only anecdotal, or maybe only in my own projections, but I very often, Daniel, it's not not uncommon that quite early on into my sets, because of course, like, when you're doing your own shows, you're normally doing two sets. I'll sometimes do two intervals and do three sets for my own shows, depending. Like, I like to help the house sell alcohol, and sometimes they quite enjoy, like, more than one interval.
Oh, yeah.
Which also, this brings all sorts of different complications into it, because, as we were discussing earlier, if you walk a room when it's your own tour show and it's planned for two halves, And that now there's a lot of like the house really suffers when they don't have like a show to sell alcohol on. So there's sort of horses for courses as far as like how you can behave against just doing like a guest spot that has the potential to bring the circus tent down. But I very often now, early into my like opening set, which essentially for me is a warm up for my own night,
Yeah.
usually. And I'll start to read off the audience that they're like, either quite subdued or, catatonic or reticent, and usually I'll then work into my patter, because it is the case that I will like take the load off of them and just be like, you don't have to like do anything tonight. I don't know if you feel obligated to, or if you have like an urge or a feel that you need to, but I will provide all of the energy for this
Yeah,
show.
take the night off,
Like,
you know.
yeah, but that also comes from, I've only recently, this is like something I hope you appreciate as well, that I've only like, and I don't give advice, but they always say the worst vice of all is advice. I take that very seriously, so I don't give advice. But a huge epiphany in my own life, and only recently, and in attempting to rectify and fight my own arthritic problems, I have only very recently, it's just crazy to me, Daniel, that in like 3 decades of doing stand up, I've only very recently, in the last couple of years, started to work my energy levels for my shows via fasting protocols.
Oh, we're not
So
eating. Oh, okay.
I never ever eat on performance days, ever.
Oh,
And all of my energy, which now seems infinite,
mm,
particularly on fasting days and fasting days associated with performance days,
mm.
in ways that I can't even express, because I used to believe that all of my energy came from mainly my food, but
Yeah.
I almost like religiously would always demand that I have like, oh, it's still grim to me to even admit to you, but I would have like preferably a can, even more preferably a bottle, less preferably a fountain sourced actual Coca-Cola. It's just gross for me to even say this out loud to you. And in best incarnation, I'd prefer it with like a fresh squeezed lemon. But my belief was that I was both with the caffeine and with the syrup, with the sugar, that's what was providing my energy. It would provide my energy for the show, which kind of can work. Like it absolutely works. At me to say, if you're doing, like we talk about the Comedy Store, somewhere that you're doing a 20-minute spot, bing bang bosh, really easy to keep the frequency up. 18 minutes, a light goes off. Yeah, I'm almost out of here. Yeah, and then I can have like my come down in the cab or on my way home on a walk or whatever. But there's always a trade-off in terms of like a graph in terms of like energy plateau, and then always a depressive cycle that follows it. And that's whether or not like I've in my own head demanded that I need to go and like if I haven't eaten before a show in my past, for example, I'd just be like, I can think of all the places I've done shows that I have like a little trap line of places where I would always go get food just before the show if I felt like I hadn't had any food up until that period. And I still think of like, yeah, the other night talking to the bouncer in front of the Comedy Store, I was just thinking of all the places that I would like, if it was showtime, where I would have to go and have a quick, noodles or a quick, plate of rice. And then always before I went on stage, I downed this Coca-Cola thinking that it was giving me this infinite energy that I now feel without having anything on the day. And now I have like a different clarity of mind. I don't have peaks and valleys to my energy. I have infinite energy that goes, and I invariably will commit to fasting the entire day, including into
You did
sleep.
intermittent fasting. Would you say then you train almost pretty much before tour?
Did I what?
That you almost go into like training mode?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And 100% commitment to being as strong and vibrant as I possibly can be for the people who pay to see me. 100%. And that includes like clarity of mind, not abusing mind or body, and investment in being the best incarnation of myself that I can possibly be for those who desire to risk putting their hard-earned money on the ground to be entertained by me, for sure.
So,
Yeah.
so when are you next touring?
October. Like
October.
I'm mainly in Scotland, but also dates across the UK in October, and people can check that out on Breakneck Comedy out of Aberdeen. They've been great to me, and my last couple of tours have been through them, and also through Big Laugh Boutique
Okay.
in
I, I,
England. But
I'll tell you one you'll be jealous of that I'm
yeah,
actually going to rub in a little bit.
please.
So I'm moving up to, well, my twin lives up in Inverness,
Yeah, nice.
and
And for
my
nice.
my mum's moving up there in
Oh,
27. My older brother's moving up there in 27, and I'm going to move up there 27.
no way.
And I'm buying a lodge. I found the one I want. I'm not okay. Figures 130,000. You get a lodge, and you're on a bit of Loch Ness that you can dock on.
Wow.
And I'm just going to live like a hermit. I'm going to grow hair
Wow.
like yours. Hope I can grow a beard by then. And
Wild.
not give a shit.
Congratulations. What a great idea. What a wonderful thing to do. I so often, or, variously recommend to people if they ever get a chance, because so few do. And again, like I've been all over Scotland for decades now, but I've only ever in the last, like, say, 5 years known of the eastern route of
Oh,
Inverness.
beautiful.
So yeah,
Beautiful.
following Loch Ness on the
Mm.
east side, on the non-main road side, it's unreal. The views, the vistas, the little tiny laneways. There's no traffic. There's invariably herds of red deer
Oh,
everywhere,
nature is
and it's just beautiful. It's above cliffs rather than at water level that you get
it's
on the west side.
it's lovely.
Such a beautiful part of the
But
world.
the one thing I always thought, oh, okay, so Inverness is as far north as you can go in Scotland. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah,
No,
no,
I mean it's like
that's
so far.
the
Yeah,
mid the mid belt. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. But like
yeah, it is.
every single weekend, I get like on the family WhatsApp group pictures
Yeah,
of my twin and his dog just up in the mountains wherever he wants to go. He takes his drone with him, and he
yeah,
just goes and just
wicked.
does nature.
The spectacular part of the world
And
for
you just think to
sure.
yourself,
I'm very envious of that.
why? Because I'm London based, and don't get me wrong, I love London,
Yeah,
but what do you want from life at the moment? And one thing I've sort of speaking to you about, I've sort of
yeah,
realized, whilst your comedy is your life,
yeah.
nature is your life. Comedy provides you to be nature man
Yeah,
and
I
just go out and
think
enjoy the world.
yeah, that was certainly true a few years back, but I again, like in speaking to you earlier about my fear of the winter in Canada, for example, I'm just, and including when we were talking about how debilitating moving was for me, even for that short period of time that was like really intense with it, I am just not capable, Daniel, of being self-sufficient even, or undertaking prolonged energetic challenges, unfortunately. And my arthritis first manifested after a race in Sweden, like a 100-kilometer race in 2014, and that first took me into the realization that the pain I was experiencing, particularly in my hips at that time, wasn't muscular. So I was like, rubbing a Tiger Balm on it and trying to like work out the knots, not realizing that I was trying to massage bone pain out of my muscles. So it was like
Put
sort
some
of like
pseudo cream on a broken bone. Like, oh,
totally.
it's fine.
So
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I like, it's been a strange thing. I've been somewhat undermined by fate because, my life has always been like semi-professional snowboarder, for example. I was sponsored snowboarding up until like about that time, like 2014, about, 10 years ago as it was. And now like I can't do it at all. I've got a replaced hip. I've had previous surgery
Oh.
on the same hip. And now I'm just trying to like mitigate overall systemic inflammation again through fasting protocols and via diet. So when I'm not actually doing like prolonged fasting, I'm normally holding my inflammation back through what most people I'm sure are familiar with by now, intermittent fasting. So whether or not I'm fasting all day, I'm very often fasting for a large portion of it just to keep my like systemic pain down. And that in many ways, actually, my only focus has been, and I hate always to take this back to like my ailments. And sadly, I know the question that you asked, but it comes back to me. My greatest challenge right now is surviving without needing painkillers. And that's been massive for me. And I've been like up until about, 2 years ago, 2023 and into the first part of 24 was the first time that I was able to fully get off of painkillers that I'd been at that point on for about 10 years solid. And that included like fistfuls of opiates, Nurofen, and paracetamol. And very strangely, it was actually the level at like doctor's recommendation. So I wasn't like renegade in any way, shape, or form. But by the time I made a decision that I thought my painkiller frequency was at some point going to lead to organ failure and take my life, I was on like 1,200 milligrams of ibuprofen with about 2,000 milligrams of paracetamol because my paracetamol was attached to my opiates via cocodamol. So I was taking like fistfuls of about 400 ibuprofens with 4 cocodamols each time I took them, which would normally be no less than 3 intervals in the day, but often 4 times. And I just realized, Daniel, I thought like, I did the maths and I like read quite extensively about what the effects of those were on my body outside of like that they were allowing my life to be livable. That's like obviously the payoff of
Yeah, the
painkillers.
organ destruction on that. Like you must have been having to drink like 5, 10 liters of water a day just to
Huh.
flush to keep it functioning.
Tons, which thankfully I still do. But
Yeah,
at the same time, I did realize that I was headed for organ failure, whether liver or whether kidney.
yeah.
And and so I actually intervened. I intervened because I was through when I mentioned earlier my stenosis issues, which are narrowing of vertebrae nerve bundles by the bone around them. But I also, in that period of time, when you'd mentioned frozen shoulder, I misdiagnosed about 2 years of frozen shoulder as shoulder pain, which
Yeah,
it finally ended up being that no, indeed, it was nerve pain emanating from the neck that was
yeah,
going through the shoulder into the hand, which was manifesting as
yeah,
paralysis and numbness.
yeah.
So
Tingy
these were
fingers.
all,
Yeah,
yeah, totally. So all this was going on. And then I basically, not basically at all, I got up the chain entirely through MRIs and through meeting the head and neck departments
yeah,
in the hospitals I was going to finally getting to the surgeons who would be doing the surgery on me. Were they interested in doing so? And I was deemed inoperable because of the high risk of my vertebrae impingements on both sides of my neck. So I
yeah.
basically like hit a brick wall as far as having any other options through mainstream medicine. And that's what took me into the fasting protocols. And that's what's allowed me, to like not just gain function again, but also to gain vitality again, to gain energy again. And the main thing, to have painkillers entirely exculpated and eradicated from my life or any interest in taking them. I still have a backlog of opiates that I keep in my first aid kit, just again.
Plus somewhere hidden, don't
Yeah,
they?
always, yeah. Yeah,
Safe for a rainy.
but
So,
yeah, I
question,
don't
Craig.
need them now. And it's something, I hope if any of your viewers are curious about that journey for me, I'm an open book as I am right now in
Oh,
front of
which has been
you.
beautiful. Let me ask
Yeah.
you, Craig. Let's say hypothetically,
Yeah.
and God forbid, the pain continued,
Yeah.
and you was no longer able to be as energetic on stage
Yeah.
as you are currently, and you've been in the past.
Yeah.
Would you continue doing comedy in a different version, or would you retire it altogether if you couldn't be yourself on stage?
I'm already moving into a production role in several incarnations, and I encourage like other stand-ups and other people like creatives to have a more diverse portfolio, because if, as in my case, and as you mentioned, your entire income is based on your physicality or your capability to be physical or vital, I'd
Sound like a prostitute right now.
yeah, yeah, I'd consider yourself more vulnerable than you might think. So, anything can happen, as you know. And again, as you say, God forbid, I hope nothing does to anybody untoward. But be aware that, you may be less functional, and maybe look at already diversifying to allow yourself to be more capable should anything befall you, for sure. I'd highly recommend that.
I mean that's good advice. And I got Craig. I'll end it with this one.
Yeah,
I know you said you don't give advice, but
yeah,
I'm
uh-huh.
going to completely ignore that.
Sure.
Somebody who's just got into comedy, or they're thinking about doing stand up for the first time,
Yeah,
they're a little bit nervous.
yeah.
At this day and age, what advice would you give them?
I would say, and this I always fall back on one of the greats, Mr. Andrew Maxwell. He once said something that will always hold with me and resonate forever. He said that you have to perform enough so that you're less comfortable off stage than on.
Mm.
That's massive, in terms of like frequency of performance. Now, okay, but what's the conundrum? As you just asked, how can you do that when you've just started out? You're just looking for open mic nights. You're trying to get on stage once a week, once a month, if you're lucky, right? I then recommend always, and it's something that I did in early days, I started to realize that if I didn't have the momentum of a performance, I wouldn't be as strong on the successive performances. So if you're working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, your Friday show is going to be stronger, and that's just the way it is.
Yes.
That's obviously inconvertible as far as logic goes, but. I then recommend not being fixated on being on comedy stages. First of all, trying to be extroverted enough to perform comedy regularly is really difficult, because a lot of comedians are introverted and, in many ways have aversion to speaking to strangers, for example. But I would argue to try and get out of that shell. There's a couple of ways that you can do it if you're introverted, or if you're particularly feeling cloistered by your own environment, or pressured by like family or community or your friends, or your feeling of how people might feel or consider you here. I then recommend, like, because of that, try to get to, like, Canada, for example, has a cross country fringe festival, parade that takes place every year. It's like all the way from Victoria to Halifax every year. Everybody gets on stage. You put your, name in the hat. You'll get a venue. It might not be a great time, but you'll be able to do it. Get together with a couple of your buddies. Go to somewhere that nobody,
Out of your comfort zone
where
completely.
where there's zero social pressure to fail, and where anybody who sees you do a bad set or something that you're not proud of, they're not gonna like know your mom, for example. So that's one thing. If you don't have that facility, or if that seems too ambitious for you, then I always recommend, like, don't keep it in a comedy umbrella. Go to a karaoke night. Nobody knows you. Pop down,
Yeah.
like, pop in anywhere that there's a stage and a microphone. You go up and do Staying Alive or whatever your favorite tune is. You don't even have to do the song. Just get a hold of the mic, tell a joke, tell one of your jokes. You'll get a reaction. You'll see people, titter. You'll see whether or not they understand what you're saying. And then just go into the song if you want to, or walk away. You can literally, like, one of the things I always hold true, with stand up, is that you can always put the mic down and run for your life. Right? Like, you don't ever have to finish the joke. And bear in mind, like, if you do this enough, you go to a poetry night, you go to a karaoke night, you get one stand-up set in the week, you tell a bus driver on the way to the gig one of your jokes that you've already told 20 times in your own head but haven't told another person before. See how they react to it. See what they could have changed. And by the time you're on stage on that Friday night, you've already told that joke 3 or 4 times that week to audiences to get the reflection, to get that action. And I recommend that all the time to, if you're a young actor, if you're just starting out, that's, to my mind, the best way that you can gain experience, so that when you get on stage that next time, you're with all that same cadre of people who are usually in the same cluster of open micers who are working themselves at the same period of time in their careers. And suddenly, like, you've done 3 or 4 shows that week and they've only done one. And through that practice and through that dedication and commitment, you're just bound to have a better response. And that all, light a fire, as they say. As soon as you get that response and you start to realize you're doing better each time, and like Andrew Maxwell said, it feels more comfortable each time you get a microphone in your hand. Every time you're looking out, you're a little tiny bit less nervous. And before you know it, you're more comfortable there than you are sitting at your own dinner table talking to your family. And then,
I always, one thing I always, every time I turn up to a gig, I always allocate 10 minutes before to talk to the security guards.
Totally.
Because that's like, one, they're the nicest guys in the world. They deal with banter 24/7, and it makes you feel part of the venue already.
And you get your patter down, your mouth is working. Absolutely. I utterly relate to that.
Yeah, I love. And also cashiers, when you go shopping, treat them like crowd work.
Absolutely. As I said, bus driver, same thing. Just like,
because you're not stand past the line in the UK, are you?
Yeah, people give you the time of day. I also know, what we're working against is also socio-cultural as well, Daniel, as you know, because what's the easiest way to be deemed a psychopath in the UK? Everybody knows it. Talk to a stranger on the metro, right?
Yes.
Try, just right away in London. You want to be crazy? Just talk to a stranger on the bus and you're crazy. But that's what every particularly British act has to overcome, is people's belief and impression of that type of thing being like an undone thing. It's culturally an anathema within this society to speak to strangers. And
the one I always advise, then, if you're going to a gig by public transport, don't take headphones. So you can't get in your own zone. You're around the people.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've really done recently. I'd never take headphones with me. So you are inclined to talk to people to kill time.
I know people who really, really adhere and subscribe to that. And I can also, actually, it's curious because I've only recently had an affinity with it, in that I really like to, because, once you're kind of, I'm not going to say like at my level, Daniel, but like once you're kind of not, sort of questioning whether or not you're going to have a good show, for example, you're not like beating yourself up about it before you get there. I do find that something that friends have subscribed to for years, in terms of like the headphone thing, having like a couple of songs that you really like, not even the lyrics of, but the energy of, to kind of, as they say, like to put you in the headspace. I know like a lot of people who like to listen to Guns N' Roses before they go on, and, like just to get into the headspace. And I think that there's something in that. Personally, like before I go on stage, both, like as you're speaking about, to talk to the bouncer before you go on stage, I would go into like a heavy, complicated lyric song with energy that I really want to like maintain throughout my performance, that I will use to sort of keep my my mind sharp and keep my to gain confidence in my own headspace, essentially. So that's something I think that there's something to be played with there, whether or not it's going through your own set or finding the energy of a tune that you really like. I think there's a lot to be gained there. But I'm also, like, in my own performances, doing a lot more musical performances within it comedically. So there's a play off there that I'm also, like, trying to sort of keep the frequency in my own head. To me, there's a lot of parallels between music and comedy, particularly with timing. Very, very much so.
Oh, completely. And I've always like motion creates emotion. Yeah, like I think anyone can write a good joke, but to deliver it on stage is a completely different skill altogether. And that is all done from emotion, how quick you talk, how slow you talk.
Yeah.
And love it. All right, Craig, look, brother.
What a pleasure.
Love this, dude.
Hey, thanks for the compliments out of the gate. I appreciate it very much. And thanks for asking me to do it. And all the best to you and your viewers and in their comedy.
Craig, I love you, man. And if you're touring in October, if I get up to Scotland, mate, I need to come see you, man.
All the best with that. Wicked. Okay, hope to see you at a gig one time. Bye, Daniel.
Cheers. Take care, Craig. Have a good one, man.